Tonight, al-Nusra Front militants launched a new wave of attacks on the Syrian city of Aleppo, which has already been devastated by conflict. Dozens of civilians are feared dead as residential areas continue to be targeted from terrorist positions. Here's some footage from the embattled zone. Russia's UN-backed ceasefire monitoring center in Syria is reporting that some 2,000 terrorists have attacked a Kurdish district in the city of Aleppo. Rescue workers and volunteers are looking for survivors there. Here we can see rescuers saving a girl who was trapped under rubble after the city was hit by mortar rounds and rockets. Fighting is now raging all across the Aleppo province. More than 270 civilians have been killed in recent al-Nusra assaults around the country. Russia's monitoring center says militants have exploited the truce which came into force on February 27th. It adds that fighters from the radical groups Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam have joined al-Nusra in targeting civilians. Both groups have been accused of mass killings and abductions. However, some Western powers still consider them to be part of the so-called moderate opposition. They've even asked Moscow to end its bombing raids against al-Nusra over fears that these groups could also be hit.
For several months, the US has not fulfilled its obligations to separate opposition groups which are loyal to Washington from Jabhat al-Nusra and other terrorist positions. As they fail to do this, they are asking us and the Syrian government to postpone airstrikes. We believe there has been plenty of time for the normal opposition to leave Nusra Front territories since February. Those who have not parted ways with the terrorists now only have themselves to blame.
The Syrian Foreign Ministry sent an open letter to the United Nations pointing out that these so-called moderate groups have been killing civilians. The ministry urged the UN to review the Security Council's decision to exclude these factions from its terror list. Russia has also called on the UN to add the two groups to the list of terrorist organizations. However, the proposal was blocked by several countries, including the US and the UK. But now, facing new atrocities by the so-called moderate opposition, the State Department is sending mixed signals.
The US and other governments who have influence on the opposition to convey to them that they do need to disentangle. It's an ongoing challenge. Again, this is not an overnight thing. I would say it's our challenge, and we're working to meet and address that challenge. Trying to separate the groups, a very tough task.
Our correspondent Gaine Chichikan went to the State Department again to try to gain some clarity on the U.S. stance.
For weeks now, we've been hearing that the U.S. is working on getting rebel groups in Syria to separate themselves from terrorists, particularly in and around Aleppo. But we haven't heard anything about the results of those efforts. So I went to the State Department to ask for specifics on that.
Can you give us some specific results of Washington's efforts to separate rebels in Syria from terrorists?
I would say that those are ongoing conversations.
U.S. efforts to separate rebels from terrorists in Syria. Can you speak to any results of those efforts?
I think we continue to have conversations. This is a complex battlefield situation. We continue to have conversations with people on the ground.
Did Ahrar al-Sham specifically tell Washington, we're done hanging out with al-Nusra, for example?
We continue to have those conversations. Do you have any, or are we good? Thanks, guys.
So, the U.S. State Department cannot say if Washington had any success at getting the rebel groups to separate themselves from terrorists. It also evades the question, how can the U.S. accuse Russia or anyone else of targeting legitimate Syrian opposition forces when the U.S. itself cannot separate them from terrorists? In the meantime, the U.S. maintains that the groups that intermingle with the terrorists should not be targeted because formally they're still parties to the cessation of hostilities agreement.
The former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, thinks the U.S. is ready to back anyone in order to reach its goal of overthrowing Syria's president.
It's grotesque that America should be effectively siding with a branch of al-Qaeda. America has lost its compass, it seems. They're so obsessed with getting rid of Assad and the secular government of Syria that they're ready to de facto ally with their arch enemies, al-Qaeda. In fact, there is virtually no difference between any of these groups. Al-Nusra is indistinguishable in terms of ideology and sectarian bias and practical methods of massacre and ruthlessness, indistinguishable from Jaish al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, Fatah al-Islam, and this alphabet soup of jihadi groups. They're all the same.